Give me one, give me one. Woo! Bryant for the win. Bang! The Sting and everyone, oh my, he's got it! Wow, Michigan at the 41. What a hit! Ball's free, on the ground. South Carolina deserves to have it. Seth Rollins just curb stomped Randy Orton. And with that curb stomp, the future is now.
Welcome, everybody, back to the 5-Star Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Little, and I've been gone for a few weeks. And here's my co-host, Anthony, who's been gone for several months. But he's back looking to talk about some of his favorite WrestleManias and WrestleMania moments, talking about some of my least favorite. But it should be good as I promise I'm not going to say Road to WrestleMania anymore the rest of the night, because I'm really sick of it. It seems like WrestleMania comes in March, early April, and then the rest of the year we're back on to WrestleMania. But
with you having the network, of course, you hear it a lot more than I do. So
there's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. So are you looking forward to this year's?
I have to be honest with you, I'm not looking forward to this year's as much. I haven't been really paying attention a lot lately, just been busy with other stuff. But even when I have, it's just been I just can't get excited about it, Nathan.
It's definitely, I think it's shaping up to be not really a disappointing one, because I don't think a lot of people are really expecting a whole lot. But I think you've got a lot of younger folks, a lot of younger wrestlers, or some wrestlers that are new to the WWE roster that maybe aren't young, like an AJ Styles, who can, who has a real opportunity to just take it to the next level with all these big time stars out. So I'm looking forward to see who steps up, and I'm looking forward. I just told you I'm looking forward to the Divas Triple Threat match, and he just gave me a dirty look while we were off camera, like, did he really? Because I think that match could steal the show.
No, I disagree there. I didn't give you too big of a dirty look. I was just surprised that you said that. But I know how big of a Sasha and Becky and Charlotte fan you are. You watched them in NXT, and so I think it's going to be a great match as well, too. And, of course, now I will be honest with you. Last year when we watched TakeOver back in May, I can't remember where it was from, but I thought Sasha and Becky stole the night that night with their match. That was a great match.
Well, yeah, I read a quote from Sasha today where she said she looks at the WrestleMania card and she says she doesn't know how she can't have the match of the night. So Sasha thinks that she's going to do it. We'll see what happens. I think Sasha is going to be a good match. We'll see what happens with this Intercontinental match. I think when the guys that you've got in that match are definitely guys that can put on a good show. We'll see where that goes.
Here's one thing you might disagree with me on, though, and I haven't made my prediction on who I think will win the women's match, but I think Charlotte should retain.
I mean, I think if you really want to build a title, and that's we're going to talk about that when we get into these old manias and talking about what happened with the title. I think if you want anyone to really elevate themselves or elevate a title, you can't just play hot potato with the title. And really, with the Divas Championship, that's been the story of it. Between AJ Lee and Paige and Nikki Bella, they've just tossed it around for the last few years. Nikki Bella had a big run to end it, and now I think if you want to build these new girls, and you've got Charlotte as the heel, Sasha needs to chase it a while.
I agree.
And I hate to leave Becky out of the loop, because she kind of seems like she's the third wheel, but she can go. She can go. But anyways, let's get into Anthony gave me his 3 favorite WrestleManias and 1 runner-up. We're going to talk first about WrestleMania 3, which is the iconic. Hogan and Andre. You've seen it thousands and thousands of times. The big body slam that nobody thought he could do it, and he did it. What's other than that? What do you think makes this WrestleMania a truly iconic WrestleMania?
I think just from top to bottom, the Can-Am connection, of course, right at the beginning against Bob Orton and the magnificent Don Morocco. I mean, the crowd was just hot right when that match started. And when the Can-Am connection won, the pop was just sensational. And that started off the card very, very great. I think a match that kind of gets overlooked, I wish they could have gotten a little more time, But I really enjoyed Butch Reed and Coco Beware. It happened more in the upper card as well too. That was a good solid match, as well as Jake Roberts and the Honky Tonk Man. The Honky Tonk Man, what really made that match special was the heat he was able to draw. And I'm sorry to say this, but it's just the truth. No one draws the type of heat that Honky Tonk Man could do back in the day, even if it was a little antic.
Oh yeah,
know?
he was consistently, and when he started his Intercontinental title run later on, I mean he elevated the title. Honky Tonk Man did, and he's just a really good bad guy.
And that's interesting you bring it up, and we'll get to that Intercontinental match in a minute. I thought one of the big great things too in that match was Junkyard Dog and versus King Harley Race. That was a good match. I mean, just the place went electric when at the end of the match, even though JYD lost, when he got the crown and walked around with the scepter and everything, that place went nuts. JYD had amazing charisma. And of course, a lot of people, those of our younger viewers here who may watch this podcast, what they don't know is that Rowdy Roddy Piper fought Adrian Adonis, but that was Piper's original retirement match because he was going on to Hollywood to do movies. But a lot of people forget that about that Mania, that was really supposed to be Piper's last match. Of course, just like any other wrestler, look at Terry Funk, look at many others. The only one so far holding true to his word as far as actually wrestling has been the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. But, you know, Piper's come back. He came back many a times. He fought at WrestleMania 6, of course, and many others. But that was really his
Don't
retirement
forget his
match.
stellar WCW run either. Don't forget his
well, we're
stellar.
talking WrestleMania here, but
don't
gotta throw
forget
that in there.
He didn't retire there. He got the best of Hogan finally when they were both shouldn't have been main eventing.
And one thing to fault Piper on that is that he did not in the contract write at that Starrcade 96 to put the title on the line, which is sad. But the match that stole WrestleMania 3 and wasn't supposed to go as long as it went about 17 minutes. To me, it's one of my favorite WWF, WWE matches of all time. For the Intercontinental title, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat with George the Animal still in his corner against the Macho Man Randy Savage with the lovely Miss Elizabeth. That was just a classic match. I know some of the younger fans today and even some of the older fans, a lot of people say, well, it wasn't a great match. But if you talk to veterans, agents, and guys who know the business way better than you and I do, they say it's still one of the most iconic matches, not only in WWE, WWF history, but wrestling history, period.
Well, I'm, I always say that my favorite wrestlers were Flair and Rhodes. Those are my two favorite wrestlers. If I had to pick a third, there would be probably a list of 3 or 4 guys that I'd really have to fight, but Macho Man would be there. And Randy Savage, he was everything he did was just so good. And one thing about this is the Macho Man Miss Elizabeth stuff was a storyline that they were telling right here that went on, and it went on for 5 or 6 years, and it ended with Sherry turning on Macho Man, and then the Elizabeth running to his aid, I watched that match.
At WrestleMania 7.
Yeah, watched it a few weeks ago, and you watch it and you think, when is the last time that a story has had that slow of a burn, and you get that good of a storybook ending to it? I don't know that it's ever happened since then. I mean, I'm trying to think of one, but I can't think of it.
Yeah, as you said, that was just a great, storied history. Just with those two and just what they did, and just even the way Savage picked her as his manager, because all the greats, Heenan, the Grand Wizard even back then, were all waiting in line to have his services, and then he just brings out the lovely Miss Elizabeth. Of course, Elizabeth was from Frankfort, Kentucky. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Hogan and Andre, a great match. It was said that coming into that match that nobody had beaten Andre the Giant, but if you followed him in his world-class days and many other days, he had lost some matches. And I hate to spoil this, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Friends at home, Hulk Hogan was not the first person to body slam Andre the Giant. Hate to burst the bubble there, but
Yeah,
it
the
was
beauty
other
of
people.
wrestling, though.
Even Kamala body slammed Andre.
The beauty of wrestling, though, is you can say anything you want, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But this is something you didn't talk about, but the Hart Foundation versus the British Bulldog and
Tito Santana.
Yeah, I mean that was anything the Hart Foundation did. What was good, and that's some early stuff. I'm really, and Brett. That's kind of early Brett stuff before he really moved into that, because there was a time when Brett and Sean were just on another level compared to anyone else, and maybe anyone in that era. In that era, so it's a good match. Any other things stand out?
Another good thing about that match, and I'm glad you mentioned it, I was going to say, is that the way the Hart Foundation won that match. I mean, again, we were talking about Honky Tonk Man earlier with the heat that he had. They got so much heat in that match because Danny Davis helped them win that match with the megaphone. And he was the ref, and Danny Davis, dangerous Danny Davis, always known as one of the dirty referees. But he did such a great job, and you're right, that kind of continued the feud on between the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs, because they had been switching the tag titles back and forth. But I think just closing thoughts about that Mania, just the fans were crazy. Billy Jack and Hercules fought to a count out. That was an interesting ending, the way they did that. I thought they would have a winner there. And then, of course, also one thing to note in that first match as well, that was also the first WrestleMania, I believe, where Brutus the Barber Beefcake lost his tag team partner. They turned on him and everything like that. Greg Valentine did, and if I'm remembering correctly. And then also, too, of course, Hillbilly Jim versus King Kong Bundy with the younger wrestlers known as Midgets, the Haitian Kid, and just all those Little Beaver. It was great to see those guys, Little Tokyo, get their spots. That's something we don't really see a whole lot in wrestling today, and it's really sad.
And we're on to WrestleMania 6 here. What really stands out to you about this? And obviously you got Hogan Warrior here with. Before we get to that, anything else stand out?
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of people forget about this Mania is Demolition versus Andre the Giant and Haku. Andre and Haku had the tag team belts. They had won them kind of dirty off of Demolition, but Demolition they had been faced for a little bit. You had the little switcheroo that happened there at WrestleMania 5 where they were heels and Mr. Fuji turned on them and they became faces at the end when they fought the Powers of Pain. But when the Demolition won the tag belts that night, that place in the Sky Dome went nuts. It's one of the biggest pops in WrestleMania history.
Oh, and one of the biggest, maybe wasn't the biggest main event level talent on this at this point in his career, but someone who was really, really over at this point in time was Mr. Polka Dots, Dusty Rhodes. And he had a match, of course, with the great one, Randy Savage, and that was a point when it's kind of funny that he brought Sapphire.
Yeah, it was a mixed tag match.
It was a mixed tag, but Dusty, that was a time when a lot of people think that it really wasn't high quality stuff coming out of him, and Dusty himself said that he thought that the polka dots that Vince made him wear was a rib, but he made the best of it. They come out and they dance, and he really connected with the common man, the working man, and they put on you can't put on a bad match with Savage.
And not to be a downer, but one of the sad things about that now is all 4 participants are no longer with us. They've all passed away. And then you think about Roddy Piper and Bad News Brown that fought at that Mania. Both of them have since passed. And that's the sad thing that, Nathan, when we talk about these old WrestleManias, that really gets me a little down is those that aren't with us anymore. But also, so like you said, that was a great match as well, too. Jim Duggan, Dino Bravo, that was just a fun little, little popcorn match they put in there, but it was really good as well. Ted DiBiase and Jake Roberts, I really thought Jake was going to win that match, and Ted DiBiase beat him. Of course, the old heel moves. They had a nice little feud as well, too, and then Big Boss Man, of course, with the one-man gang. I couldn't stand when they turned him to Akeem, although he had the little move with Slick, and Slick came out there with Jive Soul Bro, but those two were a great tag team. I wish they could have gotten the belts. Boss Man no longer with us, but that was a good match as well, too. It kind of ended their rivalry. One of the things that WrestleMania is remembered for, though, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, Nathan, but the Warlord and Tito Santana fought each other at that WrestleMania. And
Yeah,
the
it was-
Warlord viciously got Tito with a huge clothesline that wrestling fans still talk about to this day. It was like he took Tito's head off. And so,
Yeah, it was a stiff shot. But moving on to the big time match from this one with Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan. And what I want to talk about is, we mentioned elevating the belts. At this point in time, you had your Intercontinental Champion on par with your World Champion, and he actually unified the titles. You know that's something that you would never see an Intercontinental Champion, against. You just can't do it right now. The way things are booked, you can't do Intercontinental versus World Champion.
and that was the first time, too, in WWF history, WWE, that had ever it'd been title versus title. And the first time that actually happened, and as you mentioned earlier, that belt had been built up by Honky Tonk Man's run with the belt, and then also Randy Savage. He had built the Intercontinental belt up, so as you said, and then Warrior did what he did. People forget underrated Intercontinental Champion before Warrior had this match with Hogan was Rick Rude. Rick Rude did the belt really, really good as well too, and Warrior was able to get the belt back from him at SummerSlam, and then they just built up to Hogan and Warrior. And me, man, I was always an Ultimate Warrior fan. When that music hit and he ran to the ring and just shook those ropes the way he did and everything was just amazing. And I always be in the face paint, loved the face paint. And so I was rooting for the Warrior. And I still remember this day when I watched that for the first time, because back then there were no computers, no internet, nobody to spoil anything for you. I remember watching on the old Coliseum videos, and when Warrior beat him, I jumped and screamed so loud that I thought I was going to have a sore throat for weeks, because I loved Warrior beating Hogan.
I mean, it was something that Hogan really didn't job a lot. Right. At this point in his career, you didn't see Hogan drop the belt very often, and when he did, it was big time stuff. And we're going to move on to what most people say is the best wrestling pay-per-view of all. Well, I won't say most people, but a lot of people say this is the best wrestling pay-per-view that has ever in WCW, WWF, New Japan, any pay-per-view. They say this is the best one. To you, what makes WrestleMania X7 or 17? X7. What makes WrestleMania X7 one of the greatest pay-per-views of all time?
I think you got to say the crowd to begin with. I mean, that crowd, no matter what match it was on point from the beginning. I'll say a minor thing that makes it too, of course, when Triple H came out, the great Motorhead singing his theme. Lemmy no longer with us, sadly, just passed away recently, but him being there and just giving Triple H his theme and singing it live, they did a great job. But just from the beginning with William Regal and Chris Jericho for the Intercontinental title, I mean, when Jericho wins that match, that place goes bananas. And then also, one that people remember this Mania for is the big spear that Edge gives Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy's hanging by the belt hanger there, and just Edge gets up and you're like, what's he doing? What's he doing? And then Jeff just kind of flows right into him, and then boom, the spear. And then you hear just Jim Ross go crazy like he does.
And at this point in time, TLC matches weren't overdone.
Yeah.
They were when you saw a tables, ladders, and chairs match pop up, you knew that it was going to be something special. And especially with these three tag teams, they took it to a whole nother level. Up, lost the Mania there. They took it to a whole nother level. But
then also Paul Heyman on commentary.
No
disrespect to Jerry Lawler, but Paul Heyman on commentary just made that WrestleMania. Him and Jim Ross, it was like, man, it was just music to my ears listening to them.
See, Heyman adds, Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross are, you can make a case they're the greatest. They're the greatest commentary team of all time. But for this pay-per-view, Paul Heyman added the edge
He did.
that it needed to get it, because no one's a greater heel than, as good as Jerry Lawler is at being a heel commentator. Paul Heyman, he makes you mad. Just the tone of his voice makes you mad.
And you had a mix of ECW guys in the Mania as well too. That's what I really liked. I really thought one character that WWE dropped the boat on was Raven. I really think that, and even Stone Cold mentioned that in his autobiography. He felt like Vince could have made a ton of money with Raven. I just think that, he was just misused a little bit. Of course, you had Eddie Guerrero and Test for the European title, such an underrated match, but Eddie carried Test, and Test really didn't do too bad. Remember, they billed him as Motley Crue's former bodyguard. But that was such a great match for the European title, and of course, Angle and Benoit was great as well, too. That was a good match, and of course, they would fight again at the next, or WrestleMania 2000 as well, the year before. But yeah, just so many, just the undercard was just stacked. And you mentioned WCW you had ECW, WCW, and WWE guys all together putting on a heck of a card.
And the thing that really makes this one stand out, in my opinion, is that the majority of WrestleManias end with the crowd all excited, yay, this is what we wanted to happen, but it ends with the handshake here between Mr. McMahon and Stone Cold, something that you just never thought that you would see. The heel turn from Stone Cold, which he says later on he says that he regrets doing, but it just made that. I mean, I think it just capped off the entire event. WrestleMania X7 is just different. It's just different. I can try to explain to you in many different ways, but all I can tell you is that it's just different. It feels different. It feels edgier. And I don't think there's ever been a WrestleMania like that since.
And Jim Cornette, of course, said that when Austin shook Vince's hand, his words exactly, that ended the Attitude Era. And I think, you can make so much debate on that, and that's maybe for another podcast and everything. But I tell you, I don't know if that per se, it took a bullet wound to it, of course. But I think when WCW closed up shop, which, by the way, a few days ago, I think it was yesterday, is when WWE, this time 15 years ago, bought WCW. To me, and we can discuss this on another podcast, to me that kind of ended not just the Attitude Era, but it ended wrestling in general too. But that's for another time and day.
The day the competition died. But moving on from that, we could talk about WrestleMania X7 for an entire podcast if we wanted to. But you said a not exactly your top three, but a honorable mention was WrestleMania 14.
Yeah, and those three WrestleManias that we mentioned, out of those three, I can't pick a favorite. These were just some of the ones that were favorite. But this is one of my favorites. This is one that I feel gets looked over a lot, WrestleMania 14. And it's not just because it's Austin and Michaels, but this is the feud that WWE had built up between Kane and The Undertaker. I mean, and I know a lot of people would disagree with me, but of course Brock Lesnar ended the streak. But if that was one time that I felt like The Undertaker should have lost, it should have been that Mania. Because just the way Kane was built, yes, we have the Wyatt family that are kind of, they try to build them as monsters today, but Kane was just
another
Kane
level.
in 97 and 98.
He would wreck people.
Yeah.
I mean, and he was legitimately scary. You can make, like you said, that's just going to stay there. I keep knocking it over. You can make a case that the Wyatt family has achieved that level for they probably could scare some little kids or whatnot. But Kane was really just a scary looking guy, and I could see that Undertaker, that would have been, if you were going to drop the streak, if you weren't going to make a streak, that would have been a good time to do it.
And that storyline continued, and the crowd was more vocal then. It's interesting that you brought up the little kids with the Wyatt family. That was a different audience at WrestleMania 14. That was the fans that just talked completely. They were the Stone Coldites and everything like that, just following him, cussing and everything like that in the crowd. Well, the Attitude Era. But one of the other matches that I enjoyed was that makes this Mania so good is, of course, he was Chainsaw Charlie then, but Terry Funk and Mick Foley beating the New Age Outlaws in that dumpster match. That was an awesome match. I really enjoyed that one thoroughly.
I actually talked to Mick Foley at Comic-Con, and he said one of his greatest feuds ever was with Terry Funk. And he said that the stuff that they did to each other, and I quote, would have landed them in prison in most other countries, is what he said.
I would say one match, and you might not like this, what I'm about to say, but hey, the world's not all the same. But one match that I would say you could skip on this WrestleMania is Triple H and Owen Hart. It just wasn't a good match. I was really disappointed in both of those.
I can agree with you, but I'm a Triple H fan. I'm a Triple H fan. I just think that he's the greatest wrestler. No, I don't. I've just always been a fan of what he's done and his work ethic. A lot of people really don't really don't like him now. But I think they've actually, WWE's backed themselves into a corner with people like Triple H, because you're supposed to hate the authority figures, and now he's one of them. So he's just a bad guy for the rest of his life.
And then the Intercontinental match between The Rock and Ken Shamrock, that was a great match as well. The decision got reversed, of course, and Rock still kept the title. And then, of course, Stone Cold. The opener, Takamichi Noku and Aguila, that wasn't a bad match. That was really good. And then LOD 2000, that was pretty cool. Them fighting the new Midnight Express, kind of add a little bit of old school as Sonny managed them during that match. And then, of course, Stone Cold and Michaels. Michaels selling in that match, that main event, was just out of this world. He is Mr. WrestleMania, and he has earned that name. And it's sad that those two never had a rematch. And really what a lot of historians say is when Iron Mike Tyson got added into that whole mix for the press coverage, that really helped WWE. And of course, another day for another podcast, really helped them kind of gain a lot of the ratings war with WCW. But just it's just one that doesn't get talked about a lot, and it's just great from top to bottom.
No doubt. And before we go into these next WrestleManias here, you brought up Jim Cornette, and I have a shot from Jim Cornette. There's a soundbite from Jim Cornette at Comic-Con talking about the business today. Can we roll that real quick?
Everybody that comes up to me at the booth at one of these functions here or in Louisville or anywhere, they always say, I used to love wrestling. I used to watch it all the time. Don't watch it anymore. And that's 9 out of 10 people don't watch wrestling anymore. That's what we've done, because now everything's so contrived and choreographed and hokey and scripted, and the corporate America and the comedy writers have gotten involved. But back in the day, I'm sure a lot of your viewers, I know I was a big fan. Everybody loved professional wrestling, loved to watch it on TV, loved to go to the matches live, loved to see guys fight it out. Now there's no fights, there's just talking and soap opera. And that's why I think people finally remember Smoky Mountain Wrestling, because it's the last time the people in Eastern Kentucky got to see a couple of guys trash talk each other and then have a good fight to back things up and settle things down. And that's the way we want to see it. I know the easiest way to make $10 million in the wrestling business, start with $20 million. Ring of Honor, I had a lot of hopes for. I love the talent, I love the product. They treat wrestling seriously and as an athletic competition. Sinclair Broadcasting, the people that bought it, which I orchestrated that buy, they turned into being a lot of cheap Republicans. You know how cheap those Republicans are. But Ring of Honor is a bright spot in an otherwise bleak sea. But I think, once again, I feel bad for the young guys getting involved in wrestling these days, because I've already had my glory. And fortunately, I don't need to be on the road full time anymore. But to make money, like you said, for the wrestlers of today, you got to be hooked up with the WWE and sell your soul to the evil empire of Vince McMahon. And I think that sometime, some way, somebody's going to come along and change that. But also, right now, the biggest, to me, and most popular pro wrestling promotion in the world is the Ultimate Fighting Championships, because they're doing pro wrestling the way it used to be and the way we liked it. Two guys have a grudge, they're going to fight over a title or bad feelings, they trash talk each other, they get in the octagon, they have a fight, and they settle things, and the crowd roars. That's exactly what wrestling used to be, it's what it still should be, and that's what the UFC is now, and I'm a fan.
All right. That's Vince. That's
Jim Cornette.
That's Jim Cornette. I'm slowly becoming Jim Cornette, and every time I listen to him, eventually everybody's going to hate me. Like everybody in the wrestling industry that I meet, I'm going to talk to them, throw some Jim Cornette quotes at them, and then they're going to hate me. But I think Jim's an incredible wrestling mind. Doesn't get along with everyone, but I mean, can you argue with anything he's saying though? You can't really argue that we've gotten so far away from the things that made WrestleMania 17 good, the things that made WrestleMania 3 good, all those things. And it's kind of funny. We're going to talk about the ones that I'm bringing up and the ones that you've brought up. All the good ones were 17 and before. A lot of the bad ones are early on too, but it seems now you don't really just. Can you remember one in the last 10 years that was just, oh, that was just so awesome? It doesn't really happen anymore. They're kind of just they're following a script and they're not messing up, but they're not really getting anyone over. First one I want to talk about is WrestleMania 2, which is kind of just like it's just a mess. It's just a mess, so it had to be here. They decided that they weren't going to do the pay-per-view on Sunday. Decided they were going to do it on Monday, and instead of doing a 12-show fight, in New York or a big place, they said they're going to sell 3 arenas. They're going to do 4 matches in each one right after the other, and it was just a cluster. It was just a cluster, and I think they had the big match was Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy in a steel cage. Hulk Hogan goes over, no surprise there.
With his ribs taped up, of course.
Oh yeah. King Kong Bundy would sit on him, which King Kong Bundy was a good, big guy, solid worker who was just a giant, and that's all he did. He was a giant. The thing that stood out to me in this match was that the longest match on the card was this hokey boxing match between Mr. T and Roddy Piper that went longer than anything on the card and ended in a no finish. They ended up that Mr. T got body slammed by Roddy Piper, and they had to pull him apart, and it was over with. It just really anticlimactic for such a long fight. What do you think about WrestleMania 2?
Oh gosh. Well, there are some bright spots. You got to think Ozzy Osbourne's on there.
Oh yeah.
He made that a WrestleMania appearance. There were a ton of other celebrities. Joan Rivers was on it, I believe, and just you had so many. That was in the Chicago part of it. So I thought the celebrities they had for it, I'm trying to remember more. It's been so long since I've seen it. But, you had a couple of them there that, as Vince always tries to do, he tries to get the celebrities. But really, I think I told you this earlier, the match that really, I think, doesn't get talked about a lot, of course, everybody talks about the British Bulldogs and the Valentine and Beefcake match, of course, but really a match that stands out to me happened in the Los Angeles part of WrestleMania, and it's Ricky Steamboat and Hercules Hernandez. And although that kind of sound like a theme with me tonight, talking about Ricky Steamboat, but him and Hernandez did a really good job in their match considering where it was. So I thought that was a bright spot on the card.
I think they had a good idea, but I think they just overthought this. They wanted to make WrestleMania 2 bigger than WrestleMania 1, and they really just overthought it. And they didn't. The Hulk Hogan King Kong Bundy feud, I wasn't around at the time, but I'm reading up on it, and it seems like they only really had a few scuffles before that.
They didn't have a lot, because my first memory of Hogan and Bundy fighting was like Saturday Night's Main Event. And Mr. Wonderful was on Hogan's side, and they fought Bundy and Big John Studd, and Wonderful turns on Hogan. It's actually my first ever wrestling memory, and I just got so mad at Mr. Wonderful because he'd been in Hogan's side for so long and everything. And then another thing that we didn't talk about too within this Mania, as WrestleMania 3, Bobby Heenan really makes these WrestleManias, whether it's like 2 or 3, whoever he manages. Just the way how his passion and energy, not just with his guys, but how bad he wants to see his guys beat Hogan. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot between Hogan and Bundy, but still, whatever they gathered up for it still wasn't a bad match.
No, it wasn't bad, but it just, I think that the lack of having the really marquee matchup to put with this mess that they threw together, it seems like they threw together, it really just left for an unmemorable WrestleMania. But moving on, we will go to WrestleMania 9, which was not terrible until the very end, when you see this and you think, okay, they're giving Yokozuna the title. He's going to they're going to use him to get a run. He's a big guy. No telling what they can do with him. And then Hogan comes out, challenges him, beats him in 20 seconds. And it's just a mess. It's another mess. And you can tell that this is when something that Hogan just said, hey brother, this is what needs to happen. Leg drop 1, 2, 3 on Yokozuna. It's just, I don't. What are your thoughts on it?
What I wanted to have happen, 2 things, is number 1, I wanted Tatanka to actually get the belt from Shawn Michaels, the Intercontinental title. That match opened the pay-per-view. I really felt like if Tatanka would have won, that could have really saved a whole lot. Razor Ramon and Bob Backlund, I don't know why you throw that match on there. And just remember, this was actually, even though it happened at one of the worst WrestleManias, it's one of my favorite WrestleMania moments. Now, nowhere near the top, but it's a good one. But Doink the Clown versus Crush. Evil Doink was genius. Matt Bourne played the first and original Doink, passed away, of course, a few years ago. But he did such a great job with that character, and that's when he was going through that whole double illusion. Skinner was the other Doink. I don't know if you've ever heard of the jobber Skinner, but he was an alligator man. He gets up and they hit Crush with the cast, and Crush goes out, the referee's out. It's just a good old-fashioned heel match. I guess some funny moments from that would have been seeing Bobby Heenan riding the camel and falling off of it and going to the ring. But outside of that, I thought one of the most disappointing matches to me, Nathan, on that card is Lex Luger versus Mr. Perfect. Perfect was the face, something he was doing new in the WWF at the time, and then Luger came in as the narcissist heel.
Yeah.
And that match with both of those, how good they are, him coming from WCW with that run with the belt and then coming right into WWF, and then just how good Hennig is, I thought they could have done better, but it broke my heart that they had the bad match they did.
Yeah, and that's kind of sad. That's kind of the story for a lot of Luger matches. I mean, a big WCW guy, but I'll be honest, if it wasn't a torture rack or a lariat, he really didn't have a. Seems like he didn't really have he didn't have a lot to offer. But he was such, he was just such a mean-looking guy, and at the same time, you could make him as a face, and he was, the All-American. So Luger, as much as I enjoyed him, he had a lot of underwhelming matches. But at the same time, he gave you some iconic moments as well.
One little known fact about this Mania, real quick, Nathan, is on the old VHS tapes. Kamala and Bam Bam Bigelow were supposed to fight each other at this WrestleMania, and they didn't. And it was the WWF did something crazy on the VHS tape. They had what they showed to say that the match wasn't going to happen is they had Kamala trying to get milk from a cow, and at the bottom they had a little ticker that said, due to the event going too long, Bam Bam Bigelow and Kamala were supposed to happen, but it didn't happen due to time. So it was supposed to happen, and then like you said,
news to me, but I'll have to check that one out.
And then of course this is one of the rarities at this Mania. This is the only Mania that Taker won by DQ. All the rest of them have been by pinfall. He fought the big man El Gigante, otherwise known as Giant Gonzalez, but Yoko should have walked out as the champ.
Yeah, that's. I think it wasn't a bad card, but the fact that Hogan comes out and beats Yokozuna in 20 seconds after already having a match earlier in the night really just puts a damper on it. Moving on to WrestleMania 11, the big thing was Diesel versus Shawn Michaels, for the championship, and it didn't happen that way because you would think that would be the big match. You'd think that was the main event, but instead they went with the great Lawrence Taylor versus Bam Bam Bigelow, and it was just rough to watch. Lawrence Taylor was surrounded by just a whole lot of football players and athletes, and then the next thing you know, we've got Bam Bam Bigelow, who was a big bad heel at the time, who could move well. They thought they were going to do a lot with him, but I listened to Meltzer talk about it, and he said that they thought that if Taylor beat Bigelow, that they could easily turn Bigelow into a face, and the loss wouldn't matter anyway. But he never really got anything out of his face run. So really, this match could just be what did Bam Bam Bigelow in the WWE.
I believe it did, and of course, the last match that Bigelow ever wrestled in the WWE was later on that year in '95. He lost to Goldust at Survivor Series because he was promised this big push. And of course, I'm sure you've heard Meltzer, but I've seen certain DVDs or shoot interviews where Bam Bam has talked about the Click, of course, and just how they kind of had stuff. And Razor Ramon against Jeff Jarrett, that match. They had already fought at the Royal Rumble, so it was kind of a rehash. The Allied Powers, Lex Luger and the British Bulldog, the Blue Brothers. Jim Cornette mentioned in that clip there about Smoky Mountain Wrestling. The Blue Brothers, they came from Smoky Mountain. They were managed by none other than he went by Uncle Zebekiah, but it was
Zeb
actually
Coulter.
Zeb Coulter later on. Real name is my mind's just slipping myself right now. Any other time I could remember his
I probably
real
could
name.
too.
But it's
I'm
just
hungry. My mind's not
yeah.
working right now.
But yeah, Uncle Zebekiah was there, and then of course he later managed Jack Swagger. But Owen Hart, and now that was really cool seeing Owen Hart and Yokozuna. It had been a while, them winning the tag belts, but nobody knew who Owen Hart's tag partner was going to be, and it was actually his first gold in the WWF, Owen Hart. But he brings out Yokozuna, and the place goes nuts, and they just squashed the Smoking Guns like no tomorrow.
No doubt. It was, but man, that Lawrence Taylor Bam Bam Bigelow match, that's just a way to destroy a card.
And no disrespect to Mr. Backlund and Bret Hart, they've had great careers, but their match was awful too. It
seemed like they just really didn't want to be there. It's not typical of Bret Hart. Bret Hart really, he goes out and just has a top match, but it wasn't the case. In my the WrestleMania that I've brought up for my honorable mention for worst is WrestleMania 2000.
Let me real quick, just one
Okay.
last thing about WrestleMania 11, just tell you, I don't know if you remember this, but Jonathan Taylor Thomas, the big show of Home Improvement, that was one of the things that made that Mania so bad, because they had more skits in the back than they actually did the wrestling. But anyway, like you said, going to 2000, just if you can skip 11, unless you're just a wrestling fan.
Yeah, JTT and Lawrence Taylor JTT and LT will ruin it for you. But WrestleMania 2000 was one that people were excited for until some major injuries happened. And this is also, if I remember correctly, didn't Foley had to come out of retirement?
Yes, it was
for this.
It was a crazy angle. He had already retired and everything, and they did this big thing on Raw where Stephanie was backing Triple H. I can't remember who Vince was backing. Shane was backing, I think, the Big Show.
And then Linda.
Oh yeah, Vince was backing The Rock.
The Rock. And
yeah.
he got hurt too, didn't he?
No, he fought in the match.
Fought in the
Yeah,
match. He fought in the
it was Austin, as you we talked about this off camera. Austin, Chris Jericho mentions in his book. There's a poster of it. The original 4 people for the match were supposed to be Triple H, Rock, Big Show, and Jericho. And I'm a big Jericho mark. Yes, I like him better than Triple H. I like his older stuff more than I do his newer stuff. But he's now more of just that veteran wrestler. But yeah, I mean, it was really an extension of just the McMahons feuding each other, which is funny because we're seeing that 16 years later with Shane and The Undertaker.
Yeah, but we've not seen it in 10 or so. But
yeah, but it's still rehashed.
It's the same.
Apples and
It's
oranges.
the same old stuff. It's more nostalgia train stuff. But this was this Rikishi and Kane versus D-Generation X. That was kind of a weird match. Chris Jericho versus Chris Benoit was
and Kurt Angle. There was a triple threat match.
Yeah, two fall triple threat match.
The terrible thing about that match, Nate, is that Angle never gets pinned because they were still protecting Angle. He can't get pinned. So basically you had Jericho and Benoit. I think Jericho might have submitted to the crossface, and then Jericho somehow made Benoit. He pinned him, I think. And Jericho won the Euro belt and Benoit with the Intercontinental.
Yeah, it was just a lot of injuries really messed it up, and I hate it for Mick Foley because he is one of the guys that, and he said that he wanted to stay retired, but he loses his retirement match. He says he's done, and then they're like, "Hey, we really need you to come main event some shows." I think he main evented with Triple H as Cactus Jack.
Yeah.
And then he comes and does this, but I really hate it because I know Mick wanted to kind of ride out into the sunset, but the option to headline a WrestleMania is good. Unfortunately, Mick, you are headlining Nathan's honorable mention for worst WrestleManias.
And then the reference that with WrestleMania, another guy, I believe he's on this cover right here, CM Punk wanted his WrestleMania main event and never got it as well too. So when I think of guys like Foley, who's a great wrestler, and Punk, never really got their proper send-offs for their main event at WrestleMania. Of course, your boy Triple H, he's gotten a ton of great send-offs and everything.
Which interesting stat, it's a if at this point because you never know. Taker Shane might main event Mania with the big stipulation. But if Triple H Reigns is the headliner of Mania, Triple H will tie Hulk Hogan for most times headlining WrestleMania. How does that make you feel?
Of course.
How does that make you feel?
Of course. And then also another one, the one thing that I didn't like about WrestleMania 2000, and a great choice, Nathan, definitely. I didn't like how they jobbed out the quote-unquote radicals. You just had Eddie, Dean, and Saturn jump from WCW. A lot of people forget this. When Benoit left WCW to go to WWF, and this could have been possibly your main event, but Vince didn't want to do it because Benoit wasn't one of his. But WWF literally signed the WCW champion because Benoit didn't lose the belt. Handed it back on Nitro to a referee, and that was it. And then he left, and he left WCW as their champ. And they could have booked it to where you could have had champion versus champion. Maybe not WrestleMania, but later on. But I didn't like how they treated the radicals. I believe they lost to, Too Cool and China. No disrespect, because China had a decent match the next year against Ivory, even though it was a squash at WrestleMania 17. But I didn't like the way they treated the radicals because I was a big fan of those guys.
Yeah, also, just one last thing about this is they had the Hardcore Battle Royal. That was, and I know the Hardcore Championship, I think this is at the time when it was defended 24/7. And I know that was part of the aura of that title, that just anything could happen. But to me, when you have the title change 13 times, 14 times in one night, what does the title really mean at that point? I mean, didn't Trish Stratus have the title at one point in this? I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. I think
even Goldust's former manager Marlena had the title, or no, Molly Holly, excuse me. Molly Holly even had it later on. Yeah. She got it at X18.
I don't know. I can't deal with this. But I mentioned Mick Foley. I've got an interesting story from Mick Foley from Comic-Con that he told, and we're going to leave you guys with that. But do you remember when Foley was Commissioner Foley?
Yes.
And this is kind of, and I'd never heard it before. Maybe you've heard it, but evidently there was an interesting story behind the little dog that he had in every shot when he'd have his office in the bathroom or the laundry room or whatever. He always had this dog in the shot, and it's a pretty interesting story about it. But thank you guys. We'll be back next week talking about.
Well, just one thing real quick about Mick Foley, and I think that's awesome that you got to interview him there at Comic-Con. He came to Hazard a few years ago to the public library, and what he said in his speech there, he said his favorite time in wrestling, believe it or not, he said out of all of his career, everything he's done, he said his favorite time in the business he was commissioner of the WWF.
It seemed like he had a lot of fun, and it was. I mean, it was good television. But thank you guys. We'll be back next week talking about the big show next week that Anthony's not that excited for, WrestleMania, and we'll count down. I'll give you some predictions, and we will have an interview with Roman Reigns. Believe that. We'll see you guys.
I went back to my room and I shaved my head, and I'd had long hair for the entirety of my career, and that was my sign to myself that I would never do anything public again, like ever. And the next day, I got a phone call from Mr. McMahon. He said, "Hey, pal, how'd you like to be our commissioner?" And I said, "Okay." And I showed up the next week on Raw, and I was just Mick Foley without any hair, and I was allowed to completely build that position because as far as I know, there's not been any emphasis on the non-wrestling authority figure unless it was Mr. McMahon. And to show that, like I replaced Shawn Michaels as commissioner, and he was never even on TV. I don't know if he was on once. He may have been on once. And I think it was Jack Tunney, when I was growing up, would be on once every 6 months to make an announcement. Sergeant Slaughter was hardly on. And so we were able to really popularize that, and I just kind of did whatever felt natural. They didn't really have any parameters for the jobs. We just made stuff up, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But every day I was throwing stuff, every week I was throwing stuff all at the wall and seeing what stuck. And one of the things we threw at the wall was the different the different offices, and there was a, I think you'll like this. Does anyone remember Sarge, the yellow dog, who would appear in all my offices in different surroundings, right? When I had my office in a washroom, Sarge was like in the spin cycle, right? When I had my office in the women's bathroom, they cut to a scene and Sarge was sitting on the bowl reading a mini newspaper. And Sarge was a gift to me from a little girl from Canada, and she'd asked me if I could maybe use this stuffed animal on TV once. And then we used it every week for 6 months. And I just got a letter from her. I hadn't heard from her since she was a little girl, and she said, "Wow, this is surreal. My name is Talia. You might remember me as a young fan who gave you a stuffed toy years ago. I got married in October, and my sister surprised me with a personal video message from you, something I could never imagine receiving. I'm sorry it took so long for me to thank you properly. To be honest, I've been thinking about what to say for months, and I come short each time. I can't even begin to describe to you how happy the video made me. The fact you remember me after all this time is incredible, to say the least. I remember how excited my family and I were to see Sarge pop up on Raw and SmackDown every week. I recorded the moment on some VHS tapes and give them a watch every few years to reminisce. The photo and books that you signed for me in the past have followed me to 4 different homes and even out of the country as I grew up. Your kindness has been a huge influence on my childhood that I will always cherish, and that video message is just a reminder why I've admired you for all of these years." Pretty nice, right? Yeah.